September 19th, 1943, a muddy, churned-up supply depot near Poltava, Soviet Ukraine. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, coal smoke, and unwashed bodies. Sergeant Major Ivan Volkov, his face etched with fatigue and the permanent grit of the front, supervises a line of exhausted men. They are unloading a fresh railway shipment, a seemingly endless train of flat cars snaking away into the gloom. The rhythmic thud of crates hitting the ground is the soundtrack to the Eastern Front. "Faster, you slackers! That anti-tank battery needs its shells before the Fritz decides to pay a visit," Volkov shouts, his voice raw. But today, something is different. Amidst the familiar boxes of 76mm shells and crates stenciled in Cyrillic for Mosin-Nagantov rifles, a new type of box is being unloaded. They are sturdy, wooden containers marked with strange, crisp black lettering, USA, and a simple, unmistakable designation, food. They dwarf the small, rough boxes the Red Army usually receives. The men murmur, confusion creasing their brows. "What is this, Comrade Sergeant Major?" asks Private Dmitry Suslov, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy sleeve. "It is Tushanka? It is too heavy for just tinned meat." Volkov approaches the nearest crate, prying the lid open with a crowbar. He looks inside. His eyes, accustomed only to the monotonous gray-green of the war, widen slightly. The crate is packed with tins, but they are not the familiar rough Soviet Tushanka cans. These are bright, shiny, and geometrically perfect. Some are labeled with unfamiliar English words, pork luncheon meat. Others contain vacuum-sealed packets of a fine yellow powder. The men gather, staring. These are not just supplies. They are artifacts from another world, proof of an alliance that stretches across two oceans. This is Lend-Lease, the American-made bounty promised by the Pravda reports, now solid and real, sitting in the mud of the Ukraine. Volkov pulls out a rectangular, bright blue can. It feels heavy, dense. He turns it over. The picture shows a slice of pink meat. "This," Volkov says, holding it up, the sound of a distant German artillery strike momentarily drowned out by the metallic smell of the can. "This is the American meat. They call it Spam." He then pulls out a cardboard box filled with long, slim, white tubes. "Cigarettes," the label reads, and next to them small square cans of K-rations designed for individual soldiers. The men have been surviving on black bread, thin cabbage soup, and the occasional meager can of Tushanka. To see such a variety, such abundance, dedicated entirely to the business of eating, is a shock. For the Soviet soldier, every resource is scarce, every meal a desperate fueling of the war machine. In this box, however, there are luxuries. Chocolate bars wrapped in silver foil, little packets of chewing gum, cans of powdered milk and powdered eggs. The men look at the fine yellow dust of the egg powder, their faces a mixture of suspicion and fascination. "Comrade Sergeant Major," Dmitri whispers, hesitantly reaching for a stick of gum, "do you think it is safe to eat? Why is the meat not stewed?" Volkov pockets the blue can, its cold weight reassuring. "We'll find out. If it helps us kill more Germans, we'll eat it. Now distribute these boxes to the platoons, and no sneaking off with the chocolate, or I'll feed you to the tanks." The men, energized by the unexpected gifts, return to work with a new, strange determination. The war grinds on, but for a moment, the taste of America is in the air. October 3rd, 1943. A muddy dugout 10 kilometers from the forward German positions near Kremenchuk. The air is stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and kerosene from a sputtering lamp. Sergeant Volkov sits with his Skrerod in the cramped space. They have secured a few cans of the American Bounty. The men are huddled around the light, not discussing the impending attack, but the strange, rectangular tin, the Spam. Volkov uses his bayonet to punch a jagged hole in the top and then pries it open. Inside, the block of meat is slick, uniformly pink, and set in a gelatinous aspic. It bears no resemblance to the tough, dark meat found in Soviet Tushanka, which was often more fat and gristle than actual beef. "It doesn't look like meat," mutters Private Suslov, his brow furrowed with suspicion. "It looks manufactured." Another soldier, Nikolai Fyodorov, a former factory worker from the Urals, leans closer. "The Americans must have a machine that molds meat. Is this what they eat all the time?" The idea of a machine capable of producing such a perfect, uniform foodstuff was a testament to the industrial scale of the unseen American ally. For soldiers accustomed to the immediate, organic necessities of survival, this processed efficiency was bewildering. Volkov cuts a piece with his knife. It slices easily, almost too easily. He puts the cold, salty chunk in his mouth. He chews slowly, analyzing the texture. It is overwhelmingly salty, rich, and surprisingly tender. "It is meat," he announces, swallowing. "Fatty, and too much salt, but it fills the stomach quickly. This is food for doing, not for savoring." He then addresses the great culinary mystery of the rest of the contents, the powdered eggs. They had tried mixing the yellow dust with water, producing a thin, unappetizing sludge. Now Private Suslov is attempting to cook them on a small metal plate over a makeshift fire. "Watch this, comrades," Suslov announces with feigned confidence. The powder sizzles, turning into a rubbery, pale yellow substance that smells faintly of sulfur. They all stare at the result. "Is it edible, Dmitri?" Volkov asks. Suslov gingerly takes a bite. He struggles to swallow it. "It is something? It is certainly not an egg, Comrade Sergeant Major. An egg comes from a chicken. This comes from a chemist." The cultural gulf was clearest in these unfamiliar forms. Soviet rations, though sparse, were fundamentally recognizable: black bread, salted fish, stewed cabbage. The American food was engineered, designed for maximal calorie delivery and minimal spoilage. This industrial sophistication felt alien to the peasant soldiers of the Red Army. The American cigarettes were a different matter. The unfiltered Soviet papyrosi, cheap tobacco rolled in a cardboard tube, were harsh and prone to crumbling. The American brands like Camel or Lucky Strike, found in every food box, were universally smooth, fragrant, and filtered. The men didn't even try to ration them. They smoked them immediately, sometimes exchanging the Spam for a whole carton of the rich, foreign smoke. The white smoke drifting through the dugout, smelling of Virginia tobacco instead of harsh Mahorka, was a small, temporary victory over the grinding misery. Volkov takes a long drag of a Camel. The taste of rich tobacco settles the salt from the Spam. He looks at the label of the blue can resting on the earth, the simple, confident font of the brand name. They were fighting a brutal war of attrition, sacrificing millions. The Americans were providing fuel, not just for the machines, but for the men themselves, fuel wrapped in bright, optimistic packaging. November 15th, 1943. A temporary staging area near Jytomyr during a brief lull after a successful advance. The war had stripped the Soviet soldier of comfort, reducing life to its most brutal necessities. But the Lend-Lease boxes began to introduce a sliver of forgotten civilization. It wasn't just the food, but the ancillary supplies that truly astonished the men. Private Yuri Borodin, shivering despite his rough wool fafika jacket, pulled a pair of American wool socks from a crate of sundry goods. They were thick, soft, and perfectly shaped, a world away from the thin, often hole-ridden rags or coarse foot wraps, portienki, that most Red Army men used inside their boots. "Comrade Sergeant Major," Yuri says, holding them up, his voice hushed. "2 socks, identical, and they are thicker than my entire coat." This was the quiet, profound realization of industrial capacity, the ability of the United States to produce not just tanks and planes, but millions of perfectly matched high-quality socks spoke volumes. For a nation that had cannibalized its consumer industries entirely for arms production, this was almost unbelievable luxury. The same disbelief surrounded sugar. The American food boxes contained small, perfectly sealed packets of granulated white sugar and hard candies. Sugar in the Soviet Union was a severely rationed commodity, often only available in rough, dark chunks for flavoring weak tea. Here it was, abundant and refined, destined to sweeten coffee that was also often included in the American kits, a rich, dark powder that smelled of distant tropical places. Volkov watched as his men experimented. The most popular use for the processed meat, the Spam, was not to eat it cold, but to fry it on a shovel blade over a fire, rendering down the copious fat to cook potatoes scavenged from the recently liberated fields. The American canned meat, originally intended as a standalone meal, became the crucial, flavorful cooking medium, a replacement for the always scarce lard. This was the process of adaptation, the Soviet soldier finding a way to integrate the alien industrial food into their traditional peasant cooking methods. "Sergeant Major," Nikolai Fyodorov calls out, holding a small metal canister. "What is this one? It looks like grease for a machine gun, but it smells like fruit." Volkov examines the can. It's marked Peach Preserves. He opens it. Inside is a thick, syrupy, brightly colored fruit spread. The men stare. Fresh fruit, let alone preserved fruit of this quality, was utterly unknown near the front. They had subsisted on hard bread and kasha, porridge. "It is a delicacy," Volkov pronounces, tasting a dollop. "The Americans are fighting a war with dessert." The greatest impact of the Lend-Lease food was not just caloric, it was psychological. It provided a sudden, stark contrast to the endemic scarcity. It was a tangible sign that a powerful, wealthy ally was truly committed to their cause, shipping comforts along with the crucial P-39 Airacobra fighters and the Studebaker trucks. The knowledge that the enemy was running on exhausted rations while they were frying Spam and smoking American cigarettes provided a morale boost far beyond the simple caloric value. February 8, 1944. A biting cold evening in a hastily dug communications trench outside Rivne, following the counteroffensive in the northern Ukraine. The trenches were freezing, fuel for heating was desperately scarce, and the men huddled together for warmth. Sergeant Volkov and Private Fyodorov were sharing a meager fire, boiling water for tea. The American boxes continued to arrive, their contents now familiar, though the fascination never completely faded. Fyodorov pulls out a small, flat can marked oleomargarine. The Russian designation stamped over the original English was simply maslo, butter. "Comrade Sergeant Major," Fyodorov asks, squinting at the label in the dim light, "they call this butter, but it is too pale, and it doesn't taste like the butter from the collective farm." This was the final, and perhaps most illustrative point of confusion. Margarine, made from vegetable oils and sometimes animal fats, tallow, was a sophisticated industrial product designed for long shelf life and spreadability, the very definition of wartime food engineering. Soviet butter, when available, was heavy, churned farm butter, rich with the flavor of milk. Volkov takes a taste of the margarine. It is bland, waxy, and melts strangely on the tongue. "It is not butter, Nikolai," he confirms. "It is a butter substitute. It is made to look like butter so you don't starve, but it saves the real milk for the children." He was guessing, but the logic felt sound to a man who understood the ruthless calculus of wartime production. The men had learned to use the margarine, spreading it thinly on their black bread to add necessary fat and calories, but they never fully trusted it. Like the powdered eggs, it felt like a scientific trick rather than true food. The ultimate fate of the most abundant American rations, however, was barter. The Spam became the unofficial gold standard of the front lines. A can of Spam could purchase almost anything: local samagon, moonshine, fresh potatoes from a liberated village, or even specialized services from the support troops. The American meat, being dense, shelf-stable, and universally high in calories, became the ideal currency. A medic, Senior Lieutenant Yelena Rostova, stops by their trench to check on a wounded man. Volkov uses the opportunity to ask him a question that had been bothering him. "Comrade Doctor," he asks, "when we get the boxes, there are always these little squares of flat, sweet stuff. They are foil-wrapped, chocolate bars, but they do not taste like our confectionery. They taste waxy. We call it the American sweet dirt." Elena smiles, the first genuine smile Volkov had seen in weeks. "That, Comrade Sergeant Major, is called tropical chocolate," she explains. "It is made to withstand the heat of the Pacific, where the Americans also fight. It is high in fat, so it will not melt. It is designed for maximum energy, not for enjoyment." It was a final, sobering lesson. Even the candy was a weapon, optimized for survival in conditions the Red Army men could barely imagine. The Lend-Lease food packages were not just sustenance. They were a portable laboratory of Western capitalism and industrial might, a strange, sweet, salty taste of the world they were fighting to save. Volkov unwraps a Camel cigarette, lights it, and takes a slow, deep breath, savoring the richness. The war was brutal, but for now it had the distinct flavor of American pork, Virginia tobacco, and manufactured optimism.